I stood at the end of the table, the bread basket still in my hands, as my daughter's voice cut through the laughter. Just let her starve. The words landed soft but sharp, like glass wrapped in linen. No one looked up. The chandelier hummed, the wine glasses trembled, and I realized I'd spent a lifetime feeding people who never noticed I was hungry. That night, I stopped serving dinner and started serving consequences. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Family dinner at Claire's home. Crowded, rushed, disjointed. Lydia asks if there's bread. Claire snaps. Ruby watches. Passive aggression escalates. Laughter at Lydia's expense. The dining room was a smother of voices and clattering cutlery, the chandelier buzzing faintly overhead like a fly trapped in amber. The table, too small for 8 but stretched with ambition, creaked under mismatched dishes. Roasted chicken carved too early, over-salted green beans, a sweating glass bowl of potato salad no one had asked for. The air smelled like warm wine and leftover arguments. Claire moved between seats like a director checking the lighting, tight smile, clipped commands. Pass the chicken to your uncle. Ruby, not so much sauce. Lydia, she paused, frowning toward the far end of the table. Did you not eat before coming? Lydia, mid-reach for a bread roll, froze with her hand still hovering over the basket. Her cheeks flushed, but she didn't move. Her fingers curled back slowly, one by one. Ruby looked up from her plate, eyes catching the tension like glass reflecting firelight. She sat beside Claire, across from Lydia, and said nothing, just watched. I was just asking, Lydia said finally, voice low. Didn't see any bread on the... Claire cut her off with a scoff, already turning to refill her husband's wine. If you're starving, you should have thought about that before coming empty-stomached. We're not a soup kitchen. Someone snorted. Maybe Brian, Claire's brother-in-law, already 3 drinks in and loud in that charming, excusable way people call just being Brian. The laugh had no specific owner, but it had weight. It settled in Lydia's lap like a stone. Just let her starve, Claire added. Loud enough to land, but light enough to feign innocence. She didn't look at anyone as she said it. It floated above the table, wrapped in a laugh-track tone, like it came with a wink. No wink followed. This time, there was laughter. A ripple. Nervous, then genuine. Ruby looked around. No one seemed bothered. Forks clinked. Chairs shifted. The cruelty went down easy. Lydia didn't touch the chicken, or the beans. Her eyes stayed on the bread she hadn't taken, as if it might vanish if she blinked. Claire reached for her own plate, smiling now. More wine, Ruby? Ruby nodded out of reflex. Her fingers trembled just slightly as she held her glass. Lydia noticed. Claire didn't. There was a rattle of footsteps from upstairs, the sound of a toilet flushing, a child calling for a tablet. Life went on in the house like this was normal. Maybe it was. Lydia sat straighter, folding her napkin across her lap like armor. She hadn't touched her fork. Claire finally looked at her, one eyebrow lifted, voice light. What? You're not eating now? Before Lydia could answer, Ruby said softly, Maybe she's just not hungry. The room quieted, just for a beat. Claire's head turned slightly, her expression unreadable, but her eyes landed on Ruby like heat. Then Brian laughed again, this time at something on his phone, and the moment dissolved. Claire looked away. Ruby reached across the table and nudged the bread basket toward Lydia. Quietly, deliberately, Lydia looked at her, then at the bread. She picked up a roll. She took a bite. And Claire's voice cut in, soft, smooth, deadly. Oh, now she eats. The living room smelled like vanilla wax and old upholstery. Lydia sat cross-legged on the floor, albums stacked beside her like little coffins. Inez hovered nearby with a second cup of tea, her slippers making soft shh sounds on the hardwood. That's your 6th birthday, Inez said, pointing at a sun-bleached photo. Lydia, in a crooked tiara, mid-giggle. You cried because the candles melted the frosting before you got to blow them out. Lydia stared at the image. It was framed in plastic, faded at the edges. She looked happy, carefree, but the moment in her gut was cold. None of this felt the way it looks, she murmured. Inez settled beside her on the rug, legs creaking as she crossed them. Memories lie, babe, especially the glossy ones. The page turned. 4th of July barbecue, 2006. Claire in a white tank top, tongs in hand, grinning like she owned the sun. Lydia in the corner, face pinched, holding a sparkler she hadn't wanted. Another page, Thanksgiving. Claire at the head of the table, carving knife poised. Lydia, out of frame. She remembered being told to step aside. She was blocking the good light. Lydia's fingers hovered over Claire's face, then moved. She reached for the precision blade she'd set beside the albums. It glinted under the lamp like a decision already made. With calm, practiced pressure, she sliced around Claire's image, lifting her from the page like a surgeon removing rot. Inez said nothing. Another page, another cut. Claire's arms around Lydia at a graduation party, snip. Claire at the baby shower, holding a pastel onesie like a trophy, snip. You don't have to erase her, Inez said finally, not unkind. Just stop giving her your spotlight. Lydia paused. The page beneath her fingers was from Christmas, the one where Claire had insisted everyone wear matching pajamas. Even though Lydia had said no, her face in the photo looked stiff. Claire's arm draped across her shoulders like ownership. She peeled Claire away, the photo curled in her hand like something trying to disappear. Inez leaned over and offered a small tin. Lydia dropped the scraps inside, watched them settle like dead leaves. Silence stretched. I kept a journal once, Lydia said, not looking up. In high school. Wrote down things I couldn't say out loud. What happened to it? Claire read it. I came home and she was quoting it back to me, like a comedy routine. She made Ruby listen. Inez's eyes darkened, but her voice stayed gentle. You ever think about writing again? Lydia didn't answer right away. She stood, crossed the room, opened the drawer under the bookshelf where the bills and junk mail lived. She pulled out a spiral notebook, blank except for a phone number scribbled on the back cover. She stared at the first page. Then, in slow, even print, she wrote, Things I wasn't allowed to say out loud. She underlined it twice. Inez watched from the floor, still cross-legged, still quiet. But her eyes were fierce, like she was watching something be born. That night, after Inez went to bed, Lydia stayed up. She sat at the kitchen table with the notebook open, the blade beside it, and Claire's smiling cutouts in a tin. She didn't cry. Instead, she opened her laptop, clicked past a dozen open tabs, and found it again, a flyer for a free community writing class at the public library. Thursday nights, no experience necessary. Her finger hovered over the register button. She clicked. Then, from the hallway, a familiar voice. Groggy, distant. Ruby. Lyd? You still up? Lydia froze. The room smelled like dry erase markers and peppermint tea. A circle of second-hand chairs ringed a long folding table. Community flyers fluttered on the bulletin board in the corner. Grief support every other Tuesday. Beginner knitting, know your rights. Lydia sat near the edge of the circle, notebook clasped shut in her lap. She hadn't brought a laptop, like some of the others, didn't bring snacks, didn't even take off her coat. Marla, the facilitator, was 50-ish, denim-shirted, with curls tied up in a red scarf and sleeves pushed to her elbows like she was always ready to help move furniture. She smiled easily, even at the quiet ones, especially at them. Let's write a prompt today, she said. Something simple, just a truth, but one you never said out loud, maybe even to yourself. She uncapped a marker and wrote on the board in loose, slanted strokes. Write what made you swallow your voice. Around the room, pens began to move, the sound of scribbling, the soft rustle of pages turning, the occasional creak of shifting weight. Lydia watched them first, then looked down. She opened to the second page of her notebook. Her fingers hesitated, then wrote, Just let her starve. The letters came slow, like they were being carved into stone. She underlined it once, then again. Her hand trembled. Marla glanced around the room, letting the silence settle before speaking. Anyone want to read what they wrote? A man with kind eyes and an old hoodie read something about his mother's silence after a divorce. A young woman in headphones shared a line about growing up as an afterthought. Laughter mixed with pain, careful as glass. Then Marla's gaze landed gently on Lydia. You? Lydia looked up. The circle felt smaller all of a sudden. Her throat closed around the word before it could come. She shook her head just once. A quick, small no. Marla didn't push. You don't have to read. Writing is its own kind of saying. Someone across the room nodded. Lydia felt the gesture more than she saw it. Afterward, as the circle broke apart, people hugging, packing up, promising to come back, Lydia stayed behind. She hovered near the stack of tea bags by the wall and poured hot water into a paper cup. Peppermint. She didn't even like it, but her hands needed something to hold. Marla approached quietly. You wrote something powerful, she said. Not a question. Lydia didn't answer. Whatever it was, Marla added. You gave it shape. That's not nothing. At home later, the house was dark. Inez had left a sticky note on the fridge. Made soup. Left it warming. Good job, girl. A little heart drawn at the end. Lydia sat in the breakfast nook with her tea, this time chamomile, and opened the notebook again. She stared at the words. Just let her starve. She ran a finger under the sentence, then took her pen and underlined it. Hard. It looked back at her like a bruise she finally touched. Inez walked in barefoot, arms crossed against the chill. How'd it go? She asked, voice still wrapped in sleep. Lydia looked up. We were supposed to write what made us lose our voice. Inez poured herself tea. You write it? Lydia nodded. Didn't say what it was. Inez took a long sip, then leaned her hip against the counter. You know, paper listens better than family sometimes. Lydia smiled, faint and crooked. Then her phone buzzed. A text. Ruby. Can we talk? I found something in the trash. The coffee shop was too bright for a Sunday. Morning light slashed through the tall windows, catching on the chrome napkin dispensers and bouncing off the tile floor like stage lights. Lydia sat across from John in a corner booth, nursing a tea she hadn't touched. A small plate sat beside it, half a scone, crumbling at the edge. John leaned forward, elbows on the table, fingers laced. You've been a little off the grid lately, she tilted her head. You mean I haven't answered your text within the usual 30 seconds? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I just mean, you've been quiet, distant. Lydia exhaled slowly through her nose. I've been quiet because talking costs me more than silence does. John blinked. She wasn't being cruel, but she wasn't softening it either. You don't think isolating yourself might be, I don't know, making things harder? She stirred the tea, not looking up. That's how I stopped bleeding. He froze, visibly startled. Lyd, I'm not trying to hurt anyone, she added, still stirring. I'm just done bleeding out for people who never noticed the wound. A silence stretched between them. John reached for his cup and nodded like he understood. But he didn't. Outside, a bus rumbled past. A child screamed with laughter, sharp and wild. Lydia stood. I need to go, she said. Already? She didn't answer, just gathered her bag and slipped out the door, the bell chiming behind her like a punctuation mark. Later that afternoon, Lydia walked into the UPS store on Ashford Avenue. The fluorescent lights hummed above her. Everything smelled like dry cardboard and toner. She waited her turn, filled out the paperwork, and paid for 6 months up front. When the clerk handed her the receipt, her box number was scrawled at the bottom in blue ink, a little crooked. It felt heavier than paper should. That night, she sat at the kitchen table with her notebook open beside her. She printed out the first 3 pages of her writing, double-spaced, margin justified, clean. She folded them carefully, slid them into a cream-colored envelope, and wrote the box number in neat block letters across the front. No name, no sender. She sealed it, held it for a long moment, then added it to her bag. The next day, she stopped at Feldman Office Supply. The place was nearly empty, just a teenage cashier scrolling his phone behind the counter. Lydia walked the aisles until she found it. A compact black shredder, no frills, small enough to sit on her desk without looking like a threat. At checkout, the kid glanced at it and smirked. Let me guess, bad breakup? Lydia returned the smallest smile. Something like that. Back home, she plugged it in next to her desk and set a clean white note card in front of it. She wrote on it, not for bills, for boundaries. By Thursday, she'd shredded 3 guilt-ridden apology letters she'd never mailed, 2 of Claire's old grocery lists stuck to her fridge, and a birthday card that said, "You've always been the brave one," in Claire's handwriting. The shredder didn't judge, it just erased. It was dusk when the doorbell rang. Inez was out. Ruby hadn't said she was coming. Lydia froze mid-sentence, fingers hovering over the keyboard. The bell rang again. She walked slowly to the door. No one there, just 2 paper grocery bags resting on the welcome mat. Claire's SUV was already reversing out of the driveway, her brake lights glowing through the evening haze. Lydia didn't wave, didn't move until the car was gone. She brought the bags inside, set them on the counter, and began unpacking. A container of strawberries, half soft, half mold-speckled. A pint of Greek yogurt with a sell-by date already behind them. A dented can of soup, unlabeled. A gallon of milk that sloshed warm. Claire's signature move, the illusion of kindness, delivered with quiet sabotage. Lydia stared at the spoiled groceries. She opened her notes app and typed, "Claire doesn't bring gifts. She delivers guilt in biodegradable packaging." She deleted it. Started again. "Claire doesn't bring gifts. She leaves evidence." That one stayed. She picked up a strawberry, pressed it in her palm until it burst. Red juice ran down her wrist. The front door creaked. Lydia froze. "Hello?" Ruby's voice floated in, casual but curious. "Is someone home? Why does it smell like bad fruit?" The waiting room smelled faintly of antiseptic and overripe magazines. A muted TV flickered between segments of a daytime talk show no one was watching. Lydia sat near the corner, purse at her feet, clipboard balanced on her knee. The patient information update form lay in front of her. Those same polite boxes asking the same impolite things. Emergency contact. Name, relationship, phone number. Her hand hovered over the line longer than necessary. For years she had written Claire Donovan, sister, 405-556-21 and 98. Without thinking, it had always been automatic, like muscle memory. Now the pen stalled. The nurse's voice, brisk but warm, drifted from behind the counter. "Take your time, hun." Lydia smiled politely, but her pulse quickened. She tapped the pen once against the page, then once more. The air felt heavy, like she was about to tell the truth in public for the first time. She crossed out Claire Donovan with a single, clean stroke. The ink bled slightly into the paper. On the next line, she wrote, "Inez Porter, friend, 405-773-9061. Then, almost impulsively, she added another line beneath, "Alternate contact, Marla Benson, library workshop coordinator, 405-2-8-4510. Her handwriting looked steadier than she felt, but when she turned in the clipboard, the nurse glanced at it, brow furrowing briefly. "You're changing your emergency contact." "Yes. Usually family stays the same every year." Lydia offered a faint smile. "That's the problem," the nurse blinked, unsure whether to laugh, apologize, or move on. She went with the safest option and stapled the paperwork. "All right then, you're all set." As Lydia walked down the hallway, the fluorescent lights hummed above her. Each step felt fractionally lighter, as if the floor had shifted upward to meet her soles. Like gravity had briefly loosened its grip. Outside, the sky was a dull February gray, cold enough to sting, not enough to snow. She wrapped her scarf twice around her neck and exhaled. The vapor rose and vanished. For the first time in years, her name on a form didn't feel like someone else's property. She drove home with the radio off, letting silence be its own song. The parking lot salt crunched under her tires. At a red light, she caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. There was something in her eyes she hadn't seen before, not peace exactly, but the early sketch of it. When she walked into the house, Ruby was there, sitting cross-legged on the couch, a notebook open on her lap, hair in a loose bun that mirrored Lydia's in the way sisters sometimes copy without meaning to. The TV was on mute. A mug of something half-drunk steamed on the coffee table. Ruby looked up with a small smile that didn't quite reach all the way. "Hey, I didn't know you had an appointment today." Lydia hung her coat on the hook. "Just a checkup." Ruby closed her notebook but didn't move it from her lap. You've been writing a lot lately. Lydia turned toward her. Is that a question or an observation? A little of both. Ruby's voice was soft, cautious. I found another page in the trash, just one line. Paper listens better than family sometimes. It didn't sound like fiction. Lydia sighed, walking to the kitchen. I'm not writing about you, Ruby followed, mug in hand. Then who? Lydia opened a cabinet, reached for tea. Just me, she said. For once, just me. Ruby leaned against the doorway. Her eyes softened, but something unreadable lingered behind them. You know, Mom, Claire, she said she's been worried. Lydia laughed once, short and bitter. I'm sure she is. Losing control must be terrifying. Ruby flinched. That's not fair. It's not meant to be. Lydia turned, meeting her sister's gaze squarely. You asked who I'm writing about? It's about the parts of me that still think I owe her grace. Silence. The kettle clicked off. Ruby stood there, torn between defense and understanding, before she spoke again. Just be careful, okay? Not everyone wants to be written. Lydia poured the hot water over her teabag, the steam rising between them like fog. I know, she said quietly. That's why I'm doing it. She carried her mug to the desk, sat down, and opened her notebook. The shredder waited beside her, its black plastic mouth gleaming under the lamplight. She uncapped her pen. Then, buzz. A new voicemail alert lit up her phone. Unknown number. She hesitated, pressed play. Claire's voice, syrup-sweet, filled the air. Hi, Lydia. I heard you changed some paperwork. You forget who's supposed to take care of you when something goes wrong? Lydia froze, pen still hovering above the page. The knock came sharp and fast, the kind that carried impatience before sound. Lydia had just set the kettle on when she saw the blur of Claire's SUV in the driveway. Silver, self-satisfied, still idling. For a moment she thought about not answering. Then she realized that silence, too, could be twisted into guilt. She opened the door. Claire stood there in a camel coat and oversized sunglasses, one hand clutching her phone, the other perched on her hip like punctuation. You changed your emergency contact. No greeting, just the accusation. Lydia let the screen door rest between them. You got my voicemail. I shouldn't have had to hear it from the nurse, Lydia. Claire's voice was tight, theatrical in its restraint. You really think this is healthy? Cutting out family? For what? Some hobby group at the library? Lydia didn't answer. The kettle clicked behind her, soft and steady. Claire stepped inside without being asked. This isn't you. You're... She stopped herself, scanning the living room as if the furniture might side with her. Is this your way of dying dramatically? Because that's what it feels like. Lydia turned toward the kitchen, her movements deliberate, slow. She poured the hot water into a mug, watching the swirl of steam rise between them. Her voice was even when she spoke. No, she said. It's my way of finally living. For the first time, Claire looked uncertain. She adjusted her sunglasses, even though the house was dim. You sound ridiculous. Maybe. Lydia dropped a teabag into the mug, the string disappearing into the water. Or maybe I sound like someone who's done rehearsing your lines. Claire's jaw clenched. You're being cruel. No, Lydia said again, quieter. I'm just not performing. The silence that followed was elastic, stretching, threatening to snap. Outside, a car door slammed down the street, startling them both. Claire broke first. You can't keep cutting people out, Lydia. One day you'll need someone, and no one will come. Then at least they'll come because they want to, Lydia said, turning toward her. Not because the form told them to. Something flickered behind Claire's face, a brief, almost human confusion. Then she scoffed, shook her head, and turned for the door. You'll regret this. Maybe, Lydia said softly. But I'll regret it on my own terms. The door shut behind her like a period at the end of a long, overwrought sentence. Later, Lydia stood by the window, watching the SUV back down the driveway. The taillights cut through the dusk, red and clean, until they vanished around the corner. The house exhaled once the engine noise faded. She took her phone from her pocket, thumb hovering over the contact list. Claire Donovan. The name sat there like static, familiar, persistent, uninvited. Lydia hesitated only a second before pressing delete contact. The confirmation popped up. Delete from all devices, she tapped. Yes. Her reflection in the dark screen looked almost unfamiliar, lighter somehow, not younger, but unburdened. 2 evenings later, Lydia sat in the library's back room, the one that smelled faintly of old carpet and lemon disinfectant. Marla leaned over the communal table, sliding printed flyers toward her students. Local zine accepting short nonfiction, she said. Themes reinvention, no names required if you want to stay anonymous. Lydia studied the paper. The title font was cheap, the clip art corny, but the idea felt electric. Marla noticed her hesitation. You've got something worth saying, and maybe it's time other people heard it. Lydia's fingers brushed the flyer. Anonymous, you said? Completely, Marla said. Sometimes truth travels better without luggage. That night, Lydia stayed up past midnight editing. She stripped her story of names, turned Claire into the woman who fed everyone but never let anyone eat. She wrote about hunger, not for food, but for room. She titled it Appetites That Were Not Inconvenient. She read it 3 times before hitting send. The acceptance email arrived a week later. Subject line simple. Congratulations. We'd love to publish your piece. Lydia sat very still at her desk, staring at the screen until her eyes watered. Then she smiled, a small, startled thing, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to. She printed the email, folded it into her notebook between the pages labeled, Things I Wasn't Allowed to Say Out Loud. The shredder hummed faintly beside her, unplugged but ready. She touched its lid, almost affectionately. Then her phone vibrated again. New message. From Ruby. Did Mom come by your place? She's saying you're scaring her. I don't know what's true anymore. Please call me. Lydia looked at the message, her smile fading. The kettle clicked on behind her, unprompted by anyone's hand. She'd forgotten she'd said it earlier. Steam began to rise again. It started with a thread on a regional arts forum, one of those oddly intimate corners of the internet where usernames were half real names and bios still listed hometowns. Someone had scanned the zine's pages, uploaded the story, and titled the post. This one made me feel something ugly, and I mean that in a good way. The story spread like slow water, comments pooled beneath it, each one some variation of I know this woman, or this happened to my grandmother, only she never left. One reader wrote, You can feel the table in that story, the clink of the fork, the silence that swallows you whole. Another asked, Was it real? Someone else replied, God, I hope so. Claire never saw it. She wasn't the kind to linger in dusty online spaces that smelled of budget formatting and sincerity. She still believed stories didn't count unless they were on newsstands or attached to wine labels. But Ruby clicked. She found the post on a Tuesday evening while half watching a crime show and sipping lukewarm seltzer. The title caught her, Appetites That Were Not Inconvenient. The phrasing snagged in her brain like a burr. By the 3rd paragraph, her soda sat forgotten. By the last line, her jaw was clenched. She read it again, slower this time. The woman in the story wasn't named. But Ruby saw her. The dining room with its rigid politeness. The portions served with precision and judgment. The weight of expectation at every family meal. How silence could be plated just as sharply as dessert. The next morning, she opened her email app, stared at a blank message for a full 10 minutes before typing. That was you, wasn't it? She hit send before she could overthink it. Then she waited. Lydia's reply came 5 hours later. Plain text, no subject line. Still hungry. Nothing more. Ruby reread it at least a dozen times. Not sure whether it made her feel seen or accused. Maybe both. Thursday, the workshop met again in the back room of the library. The one with uneven chairs and a heating vent that groaned like it had regrets. Marla arrived late, cheeks wind-flushed, holding a worn copy of the zine like it was an offering. I got permission to share something tonight, she said, waving it gently. No names, but it felt right. The room quieted the way a congregation does before prayer. Marla cleared her throat, then began to read. Her voice was steady, reverent without being precious. The words rolled out with weight, about the woman who cooked feasts but rationed affection, who watched every bite others took while starving herself of approval. about the narrator who had learned to shrink her hunger into acceptable portions, until one day she simply didn't. The room shifted with each paragraph. A man in the corner who always wore fishing hats tapped his pen against his knee. A high school English teacher who'd once brought cookies pressed a hand to her mouth. When Marla reached the final line, I left the table still hungry, and finally that was okay. One woman, mid-60s, with silver braids and a stack of grief in her eyes, let out a sound like a popped seam. She cried quietly, not messily, just openly. No one looked away, no one tried to fix it. Lydia didn't move, didn't nod, didn't speak. She just sat there, still as the mug in front of her, watching the room hold what she'd carried for decades. Afterward, Marla folded the zine shut with care. That, she said softly, was brave. A few people murmured agreement. No one pointed. No one asked if it was hers. Lydia didn't offer, didn't need to. On the way out, Ruby stood just outside the door. She hadn't come inside, but the look on her face said she'd heard every word through the thin library walls. Their eyes met. Lydia opened her mouth, then closed it. Ruby looked like she wanted to say something, but instead she just nodded once, sharp and strange, like she was granting something, or releasing it. Then she turned and walked away. Lydia stood there for a long moment, the library door swinging gently behind her. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. One notification. Claire Donovan had just tagged her in an old family photo on Facebook. Caption: "Some people forget where they come from. Not me. No emojis. Just that." Lydia stared at the screen. Then she opened the post. She didn't comment. She didn't like it. She just stared at it, her thumb hovering, then slowly moved to the share button. Her hand stilled. The cursor blinked in the empty caption box. Waiting. The email arrived 2 days later with a subject line full of flattery. "We'd love to interview the author of Appetites." The sender was an online magazine, bigger than the zine, slicker, with a clean masthead and a dedicated lifestyle section that often mistook vulnerability for trend. They wanted to celebrate her voice. They offered a feature, a photo shoot if she was comfortable. They'd protect her anonymity, of course, unless she was ready to step into the light. Lydia read the message 3 times, then closed her laptop and pushed it gently away, like a full plate she no longer needed to finish. She didn't delete it. She responded, brief, polite, firm. "Thank you for reading the piece. I'm glad it found a home in people's hearts. I'm not interested in publicity, but I appreciate the invitation. Warmly, L." She made herself a cup of mint tea afterward, letting the steam coat her face like balm. Her phone buzzed again in the other room, probably Claire. Or worse, one of Claire's friends, the ones who'd resurface after 5 years with messages like, "We should catch up and you're in my prayers." She didn't check. Instead, she walked to her desk and opened a new notebook. The one with the soft gray cover and the elastic band that still snapped with newness. On the first page she wrote, "To the girl who knew but kept quiet. Thank you for surviving her, for eating what you were given and still believing you deserved more. You weren't wrong. You were just early." She paused, the pen hovering, then underlined "thank you" twice. Not neatly, not evenly. Then, in a different pen, a red one she used only when it mattered, she wrote a new title across the second page. "The names I gave to pain." She began the list slowly, deliberately, smiling through boiled carrots, the way napkins folded like apologies, being told you're dramatic when you flinch, empty chairs that still controlled you. Each line found its rhythm, not poetic but precise, surgical in its honesty. It wasn't a memoir, it wasn't an essay, it was a reckoning, catalogued. At some point, she reached for the worn shoebox in the back of her closet, the one she hadn't touched in years, but never quite thrown away. It was full of old cards and envelopes, fragments of performative kindness that had once meant something, or were supposed to. She pulled out one holiday card, the kind with glittered snowmen and too much cheer. The inside read, "Merry Christmas, Lydia. Don't be a stranger. Love, Claire." The handwriting was unmistakable, bubbly, overly confident, like it was trying to prove how relaxed it was. Lydia held it over the shredder. She didn't flinch when it caught the edge and disappeared in a stuttering whir. She fed it slowly, piece by piece, until the last curve of the L was gone. She set the empty envelope aside. Another fell loose from the box, older, cream-colored, bent at the corners. The name on it was in Ruby's handwriting, careful and uneven, with a heart over the I. No card inside, just the envelope, preserved. Lydia touched her fingers to the ink like it might still be warm. She tucked it inside the notebook between thank you and names, a placeholder, a bridge. The rest of the night moved quietly. She watered the succulents, refilled the ice trays, checked the locks even though she always locked them twice. And then, in the dark, Lydia climbed into bed with the windows open just enough to let in the night air. She lay still for a long time, her eyes adjusting to the shadows on the ceiling, the familiar ones, not the imagined kind. Her hand rose slowly, palm resting just below her collarbone, over the thrum of something steady, stubborn. She whispered it aloud, her breath barely audible above the rustling leaves outside. Still here. And in the next moment, as if summoned, not by need, but recognition, her phone buzzed softly against the nightstand. One name lit the screen. Ruby, no message. Just a call, waiting to be answered. The first time Ruby came over with the mic, she looked embarrassed to even ask. "It's for a class," she said, standing awkwardly just inside the doorway, holding a slim black recorder like it might bite. "We're doing an oral history unit, recording someone from a different generation, someone who," she hesitated, "lived through something." Lydia raised an eyebrow but stepped aside to let her in. "I'm not very good at performing," she said, a half smile tugging at her cheek. Ruby followed her into the kitchen, recorder still in hand. "Good," she said, trying to match the softness in Lydia's voice. "They said we should get real stories, not polished ones." The kitchen light flickered once before holding steady. The same one Lydia had been meaning to replace. She gestured toward the table, its surface clean except for a mug ring and a folded dish towel. "All right then," Lydia said, settling into the chair like it had waited for this. Ruby set the recorder between them and hit a red button. A small light blinked. Nothing else happened. For a few seconds, Lydia just stared at it. Then, as if the silence had knocked something loose, she began. She didn't speak in narrative arcs. There was no grand theme, just fragments. "Your mom was 3 the first time we couldn't pay rent." Ruby's eyes flicked up from her notebook. "I didn't tell anyone. Just kept smiling at work like my teeth were proof of solvency. Fed her and your uncle and pretended I wasn't hungry, poured ketchup packets into hot water some nights and called it tomato soup." The recorder hummed silently between them. "Claire said I was dramatic, said pride kept me poor. I told her pride kept me sane. She didn't answer." Ruby looked stricken, but Lydia continued. "Once, I called the gas company pretending to be someone else. Said my husband was sick and we had a baby with bronchitis. We didn't, not then. But they gave us a grace period. I counted that as a win." Ruby's hand was shaking now, pen stilling mid-word. Lydia folded her hands neatly in her lap. Her voice didn't crack. It didn't rise or fall for effect. It moved like water beneath ice, measured, quiet, unstoppable. "They say you shouldn't tell kids this stuff, that it burdens them, but I think silence does more damage. Silence turns into stories anyway, only they don't end right." She looked up at Ruby. "I never asked your mother to thank me. I just didn't expect to be erased." The sentence landed with a soft thud. Ruby blinked fast, once, then again. She swiped the back of her hand across her cheek like she could deny it had happened. "I didn't know," she whispered. "None of that. I didn't—" "You weren't supposed to," Lydia said gently, "but I'm glad you do now." The room fell still, not tense, not tragic, just full. Full of the things no one said when they were supposed to be getting on with it. Full of choices that had gone unacknowledged and griefs that were never dramatic enough to mourn. The recorder blinked quietly between them. "I think I need a second," Ruby said, voice barely steady. She reached for the device, but Lydia stopped her. "Let it run," she said with a wry smile. "You never know which parts matter till later." Ruby left to splash cold water on her face. Lydia remained seated, watching the kitchen wall as if it had something to say back. In the hallway, Ruby's phone buzzed. A new voicemail. Claire. The transcript preview read, This is all getting blown out of proportion. I know she's manipulating you, Ruby. I've seen her do it before. Ruby stared at the screen, then looked back down the hallway, at the kitchen table, at Lydia's silhouette through the doorway, still and steady. The recorder's red light was still blinking, still recording, still listening. The knock came again, too hard this time. Not urgent, not polite, just loud. The kind of knock meant to declare presence instead of request entry. Lydia turned off the stove burner, the soup still mid-simmer, and wiped her hands on the dish towel. She'd been expecting this. Maybe not today, maybe not before dinner, but eventually. The moment Ruby played back that recording, there was only one direction Claire would go: forward, fast, and full of fury. When Lydia opened the door, Claire was already speaking. "You're poisoning her against me." The air was sharp with autumn, dry leaves skittering behind Claire's heels. She was still dressed like armor: camel trench, high-gloss lips, sunglasses she didn't need. Lydia said nothing. She stepped aside. She'd long since learned that some fights only deepen when fought. Claire didn't enter this time. She stood rigid just inside the threshold, like she wanted her presence felt more than her shoes removed. "She's recording you," Claire snapped. "Telling stories like you're some sainted matriarch." I heard the tone in her voice. "You've got her feeling guilty. That's emotional manipulation, Lydia." Lydia didn't blink. She walked past her calmly to the bookshelf and returned with a slim print copy of the zine. No cover letter, no explanation. She held it out between them like a cooled ember. Claire looked at it like it was a threat. "What's that supposed to be?" Lydia didn't answer, just offered it again, open-palmed, gentle, like it was hers to take or leave. Claire took a step back. "I'm not reading whatever fictional martyrdom you cooked up. I was there, remember? I did the heavy lifting while you crumbled." Lydia didn't flinch. Her hand remained outstretched, unmoved. Claire scoffed, one sharp sound. "God, you're so dramatic. Always painting yourself as the wounded one. That's not what happened. That's never what happened." Lydia laid the zine gently on the entryway table and walked back to the kitchen. "Don't walk away from me," Claire called after her. "You don't get to rewrite history just because you're old and bitter." Lydia stirred the soup once, slow, clockwise. Lentils and carrots, broth thick with thyme. The room smelled like warmth. Behind her, the door slammed. No final word, no parting shot, just that hard, familiar punctuation. She stood still for a long moment, letting her chest rise and fall like surf. Then she dipped a tasting spoon into the pot. Savored it, not for seasoning, but for presence. When the second knock came, it was softer. 2 short taps. The door opened before she could answer. Inez. No announcement, no dramatic pause. Just her, in a slate blue hoodie, holding a paper bag of cornbread and wearing the same quiet look she always wore when the world had been louder than it needed to be. Lydia offered a nod toward the pot. Still warm. They didn't talk much as they set the table. Just the soft clink of ceramic bowls and the crinkle of the bag being opened. The soup ladled thick and golden into waiting mouths, the kind of meal meant to be eaten slowly, not in apology. Inez reached across once for more cornbread. Lydia passed it without a word. The silence wasn't heavy this time. It didn't press against the ribs or fill up the throat. It just was. Simple, shared, clean. They finished the meal without needing to name anything. When the last spoon rested against an empty bowl, Lydia looked up, eyes clearer than they had been in months, and whispered, almost to herself. She didn't even take the book. Inez didn't respond right away. She just sat back in her chair, hands folded across her stomach, full in a way that had nothing to do with food. Then finally, softly. Doesn't mean she didn't carry it out with her. Lydia met her gaze, held it. Somewhere in the quiet hum of the fridge, something settled. Not forgiven, not forgotten, but settled. Outside, the wind picked up. A branch tapped against the window pane once, then again. And in the corner of the room, the red light on the recorder blinked once. Still on, still recording, still listening. The letter from the community center came printed on thick ivory paper, the kind meant to make things feel official. It arrived in an envelope with a tiny sunflower sticker sealing the back flap. like someone in admin couldn't help themselves. Lydia turned it over twice before opening it, half expecting another newsletter, another generic invite to Tai Chi or watercolor night. But inside was something else. We'd love to invite you to lead a monthly writing group, non-fiction focused, open to all ages, inspired by your published piece and the thoughtful feedback we've heard from others. No pressure, just if it feels like something you'd want to do. She read it once, then again, then folded it neatly and slid it beneath the corner of the sugar jar, like it might sprout clarity if she gave it sunlight. She didn't answer the invitation. Not yet. Not that day or the next. 3 days later, Ruby found her standing in front of the pantry, holding a jar of rice like she'd forgotten what it was for. "You got the letter," Ruby said. Not a question. Lydia nodded. "You thinking about it?" "I'm thinking I'm too old to start hosting things." Ruby leaned against the counter. "You already taught me." Lydia looked up, eyebrows arched. "All that stuff I recorded?" "You didn't just tell it," Ruby said. "You taught it. Like you were passing something down." "I wasn't trying to." "Doesn't mean it didn't happen." They stood there a moment longer, the rice still in Lydia's hands, the room gently lit by late afternoon. Nothing dramatic, just soft gold bending through the blinds. She sent her RSVP that evening. The first flyer went up a week later. Writing from the Wound, a monthly workshop on telling the truth, facilitated by Lydia M. Contributor to Appetites That Were Not Inconvenient. There was no photo, just a stack of printed flyers near the front desk of the center, next to a jar of complimentary pens and a bowl of mints. By the time Lydia arrived for the first session, every seat was filled. 15 strangers, most of them quiet, some clutching notebooks like armor, others just there for the idea of it. A teenager with chipped black nail polish, a retired bus driver with a scar slicing through his eyebrow, a woman in her 30s who didn't sit until the very last minute. Lydia walked in with her tote bag, calm but coiled, not nervous, just aware of the stakes, of the room, of her own breath in her throat. She placed a printed handout at each seat. At the top was her piece, Appetites That Were Not Inconvenient, in full. Below the last paragraph, in clean, italicized type, was a single new footnote. "I'm still eating." At the bottom of the page, beneath a thick black line, were the group guidelines. She'd only listed 2. No one has to read, but everyone has to listen. No one rolls their eyes here. She said it again aloud at the start of the session, her voice firmer than she expected. No one rolls their eyes here. A few people smiled. One woman looked down, visibly relieved. Lydia didn't lead with a prompt. She didn't ask anyone to share. She just opened with a question. "What's the first story someone ever told about you that didn't feel true?" Silence, but not empty. It was the kind that stretches, not from awkwardness, but because people are unwrapping something slow, something fragile. The teenager raised her hand first, then the woman in her 30s, then the room cracked open. Lydia didn't write much that night. She listened. She passed the tissues. She kept the time. But afterward, alone in the empty room as the chairs clattered back into place, she returned to the front table and looked at her handout. She circled the footnote, then, below it, scribbled one new line in her own hand. "Next time, bring bread." And in the hallway, just outside the door, Claire stood silent, uninvited, unread, unseen. She had picked up a flyer. She hadn't put it down. The email had been sitting in her inbox since morning, though Lydia pretended not to see it until after dinner. It was from Claire. No subject line. Just the first line visible in preview. "I think we both said things we didn't mean." She clicked it open anyway. The message was short, too short, the way all of Claire's apologies were. Half confession, half performance. No acknowledgement, just careful phrasing. "I was emotional that day. I just miss how we used to be." The last line, "Maybe we could start over before everyone else got involved." Lydia stared at the screen until the cursor stopped blinking. Then she hit print. The paper slid out of the printer with that faint, hot smell of toner, chemical, almost nostalgic. She held it by the corner, reading it once more, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to confirm what was missing, any trace of ownership. any sign that Claire had actually seen her. When she reached the end, she didn't sigh, didn't shake her head. She just folded the page once, cleanly, and fed it through the shredder. The blades caught, buzzed, and swallowed. White ribbons piled at her feet. She waited until the hum went quiet, then brushed a strip off her shoe. The sound that filled the kitchen afterward wasn't peace exactly. It was something smaller, plainer, like a pause that didn't need to lead anywhere. She rinsed her mug, set it on the rack, and reached for her phone. "Inez," she said when the line picked up. "Hey you. Want to split a muffin and complain about printers?" A laugh crackled through the receiver. "You buying or am I? Let's go Dutch. I'm feeling democratic." The two women talked logistics for another minute, where to meet, whether to walk or drive, and then hung up. Lydia stood there for a moment longer, looking at the empty kitchen table. The same one where Claire had once stood accusing, and Ruby had once recorded history. Tonight it was just furniture again, nothing haunted. On the counter, her estate papers waited in a tidy folder marked LM, Personal Affairs. Marcus, her lawyer, had insisted they finalize things before year's end. Simple division, he'd said. Nothing dramatic, she'd agreed. Everything clean, equal, quiet. No one could ever accuse her of leaving chaos behind. She reviewed each page carefully, initialing where needed, signing her name in ink that didn't smudge. Each stroke of the pen felt like closing a window she no longer needed open. When she was done, she slid the folder into her desk drawer, right beside her notebooks. The gray one labeled the names I gave to Payne, and the smaller one marked workshop notes. On top of them, she placed an envelope, cream-colored, sealed. Her handwriting across the front read, "For Ruby, forgiveness isn't a door, it's a window." She'd written it over several nights, in fragments. Not an explanation, Ruby didn't need one, but a map. A way to understand that letting go didn't always mean reconciliation, that sometimes survival had to stay separate from repair. Lydia pressed the envelope flat with her palm, feeling the faint ridges of her own pen strokes beneath the paper. Then she turned off the desk lamp, its soft glow collapsing into shadow. Outside, a night breeze pressed against the window, lifting the corner of the curtain just enough to let in a sliver of moonlight. It illuminated the shredder bin in the corner, still half full of white curls, all the words she'd chosen not to keep. And then, from somewhere distant, her phone buzzed again. Not a call, just a single text. From Ruby? "Mom's in the hospital. It's not serious, but can you come?" The screen glowed in her hand. Lydia looked at the message for a long time. Then she turned the phone face down on the desk and whispered to the dark, almost kindly, "I'll decide in the morning." It was the last Thursday of the month, and the library's community room buzzed with the quiet chaos of folding chairs, weak coffee, and polite introductions. Lydia sat in the back, a seat near the emergency exit, close enough to hear, far enough to disappear. She hadn't come to speak. She wasn't listed in the program, but the reading series had picked up her piece. Appetites that were not inconvenient. And tonight, someone else would give it breath. She hadn't expected the woman who stood up to read it. 80. Maybe more. A small frame wrapped in a wool coat 2 sizes too big, and a scarf tucked neatly beneath her chin. Her lipstick feathered slightly at the edges. Her hands trembled just enough to make the page rattle as she adjusted her glasses. Lydia recognized the sound. Paper that had been held tightly. Read too many times. The woman cleared her throat once, twice, then began. Her voice wasn't polished. It cracked on certain syllables, hesitated at punctuation like she was testing whether it belonged. But the words, Lydia's words, landed softer in her mouth. More lived in, less literary. The story unfolded like memory, not manuscript. She read the lines about hunger, about setting the table for people who never asked if you'd eaten, about feeling invisible in a room where you'd made everything possible. When she reached the last line, "I left the table still hungry, and finally that was okay." She didn't close the page immediately. Her mouth stayed open a beat too long, like she was still trying to swallow the truth inside it. Then she exhaled, loud enough that the room felt it. There was no applause, just silence. Then the woman said, almost in a whisper, "Whoever wrote this saved me." She smiled through it, but her chin quivered once. She folded the paper, tucked it against her chest, and sat back down. Lydia didn't move, didn't speak, didn't claim a thing. She just sat with the words echoing inside her like warmth left in the oven. Whoever wrote this saved me. The reading ended 20 minutes later. People shuffled out slowly, voices low. Some lingered near the coffee table. Others moved toward the coat rack, their eyes a little shinier than they had been coming in. Lydia slipped out the side exit without anyone noticing. The sky had opened just as the reading ended. Rain fell steady, not furious, more like permission than punishment. She didn't bother with her hood. The walk home was slow, wet, quiet. By the time she turned onto her block, the hair at the nape of her neck clung to her skin, and her sweater drooped under the weight of weather, but she felt full, not triumphant, not vindicated, just full. The porch light was on. Ruby was already waiting. She stood beneath a large navy umbrella, holding it steady in one hand, a silver thermos in the other. No dramatics, no rushed greeting. Lydia stepped into the glow of the porch without a word. Ruby passed her the thermos. "I figured you'd forget to bring something warm," she said. Almost sheepish, Lydia unscrewed the top. The scent of black tea and honey rose instantly. They sat on the porch steps, close but not touching, the umbrella leaning between them like a shared secret. Across the street, the road glistened with rain, reflecting porch lights, street lamps, distant windows, like the world was lit from below. Neither of them spoke. They just sipped and watched and breathed. The rain softened. Ruby tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and said quietly, "You don't have to go. Tomorrow, I mean. The hospital. I can tell her you're not coming." Lydia didn't answer right away, just looked out at the road, the steam from her tea curling into the night. "I'll come," she said at last. "Not for her, for you." Ruby turned toward her, but Lydia kept her gaze forward. And then, after a beat, "But I won't stay long." Lightning flashed far off, not threatening, just a reminder of distance. Ruby nodded once. Nothing in her face pushed or pleaded. They sat until the thermos emptied, until the street dried in streaks, until silence became something settled. Then Ruby stood and held the umbrella higher over them both, and Lydia, without thinking, reached for her hand. The title came to her while chopping apples, not during some lofty epiphany at the desk or workshop, but mid-slice, juice slicking her hands, knife meeting flesh with a satisfying thunk. The house was warm with cinnamon, the light outside gold and indifferent. Lydia stood at the kitchen counter, alone, barefoot and unhurried. Just the hum of the fridge and a low Ella Fitzgerald record playing from the other room. She looked at the cutting board, the half-moon pieces stacked like quiet victories, and said it aloud without meaning to, "Still hungry, still here." Not a confession, not a wound, a declaration. She wiped her hands, grabbed her notebook, and wrote it down before the moment could pass. By the end of the week, the folder on her desktop had grown fat with pieces. Some new, some unearthed and rewritten with less apology. She wrote about joy now, not the loud kind that demanded celebration, but the slow ones. Warm socks fresh from the dryer, soup that turned out better than expected. Ruby singing off-key in the car. She wrote about choosing people who showed up without being summoned, about Saturday mornings with Inez, splitting muffins and crossword puzzles, about how the silence in her house had changed. It no longer sounded like absence. Ruby helped with the layout. She'd taken a design course over summer break and now hovered at Lydia's shoulder like an editor with a red pen and a caffeine addiction. "Center that header," she'd murmur, or, "That serif font makes it look like a funeral program." Lydia let her. The two of them worked late into evenings, laptop screens casting pale light over forgotten tea and crumpled draft pages. When the proof copy arrived, Lydia ran her hands over the matte cover like it might breathe beneath her palms. Still hungry, still here. Her name in small type, center bottom. No dedication page. Just the first line. I stopped waiting for someone else to call it worth telling. She signed the first copy quietly, with a fountain pen Ruby had found at a thrift shop. Then they walked to the library together, crisp fall air cutting their cheeks pink. The woman at the desk smiled as Lydia handed it over. "Would you like it cataloged or left in the local author bin?" "Cataloged," Lydia said, firm but kind. Let it take up real space. She didn't tell Claire, not when it was sent to print, not when the local paper mentioned the launch, not even when the library posted a photo online of the new arrival's shelf. Lydia's spine tucked between a cookbook and a true crime memoir. Claire didn't know. That was fine. Later that month, she mailed a copy to John. No note, just the book, a quiet offering. It arrived on a Tuesday. By Thursday night, a message appeared in her inbox. I read it cover to cover in one sitting. I wish I'd asked more. I wish I'd shut up and asked. I'm proud of you, Mom. You didn't just survive. You made something beautiful out of it. Lydia sat at the dining table after reading it, staring out the window at the empty street below. For a long time, she didn't move. Then she reached for a blank notebook and opened to the first page. In the corner, she jotted a title. Volume 2, What Came After the Fire, and below it, just one sentence. I'm not done yet. The kettle whistled faintly in the kitchen. From the other room, Ruby called out, You want the last cinnamon roll, or should I do the brave thing and save you from yourself? Lydia smiled, picked up her pen again, and began to write. The table was longer than necessary. Lydia had borrowed the folding extensions from the community center and pieced them together with practiced ease, covering the seams with thick woven runners and scatterings of tiny amber glass votives. Ruby insisted on for mood. The dining room, once a place of stiff meals and measured silences, had been rearranged for warmth. Every chair mismatched, every plate a little different, a patchwork on purpose. At 5:47 p.m., the first knock came. By 6:10, the house was full. The writing group arrived in layers, coats damp from drizzle, Tupperware clutched like offerings. A man in his 70s brought a tray of mac and cheese laced with ghost pepper. My late wife's doing, he said, eyes misting. She believed in heat over subtlety. A shy girl from the high school writing program had baked molasses cookies using her grandmother's scrawled recipe, the paper still speckled with batter. Inez came with potato salad no one could explain as seasonal, but everyone devoured like ritual. They placed their dishes down with care. No apologies. No disclaimers about burned edges or store-bought shortcuts. Just food, memory, and a room ready to receive both. Ruby hovered beside Lydia, cheeks pink from kitchen steam and quiet pride. I wrote something, she said, almost too fast. Not for the workshop. For tonight. Lydia raised an eyebrow. A toast? A toast, Ruby confirmed, holding up a folded piece of paper with enough trembling to betray her calm. I mean, it's just words, but still. Words are everything, Lydia said. They clinked mugs, no fanfare. At 7:15, after everyone had filled their plates once, and a few twice, Ruby stood, cleared her throat, and began to read. I've been told that hunger makes you sharper, that it teaches you what to want. My grandmother didn't just teach me that. She showed me. She taught me that surviving is one thing, but writing yourself back into your own story is another. And tonight, she made this table not out of bloodlines, but out of choice. That's something I want to remember. That's the story I want to keep telling. There were no polite claps, just soft sounds of acknowledgement, the kind people make when something honest lands deep and refuses to leave. Lydia looked around the table. She saw it all. Every life opened gently. Every person eating not just out of politeness, but belonging. No children tugged at sleeves. No expectations to perform the matriarch. No one asking her to play nice, to explain herself, or to soften her edges. Claire didn't come up. Not once. Not in stories, not in sideways glances, not in memory. And for the first time, Lydia noticed not the absence, but the ease. She reached for the bread, crusty, warm, brushed with rosemary and oil, and passed it down the line. No sermon, no declaration, just bread. Passed hand to hand like something ancient and essential. Inez caught her gaze across the table, gave a small nod. Ruby grinned and dipped her bread into the last of the stew, eyes shining with something Lydia recognized. Not admiration, but understanding. Outside, the wind picked up, stirring leaves across the porch. Inside, the room glowed. And at the head of the table, Lydia lifted her mug, quietly, privately, and whispered into the space between bites, "This time, I'm full." Then she smiled and reached for seconds.